No one came to this veteran's funeral until a young guard changed everything. Welcome back to the channel where every story reveals something deeper than words. If you love true stories that touch the heart and stir the soul, you're in the right place. Before we begin, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our global family come together. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely won't want to miss. Now, take a deep breath and get ready for today's unforgettable journey. In a quiet corner of Manchester, tucked behind brick walls and fading hedges, stood a modest care home, the kind where lives end not with fanfare, but with soft goodbyes, whispered only by time itself. Room 14 belonged to a man named Franklin Hughes. He was 78 years old, no visitors, no family photos on the wall. Just a single framed image, a young soldier in a crisp Coldstream Guards uniform, standing proud and tall. Back when the world still remembered his name, the nurses called him Mr. Frank. He didn't speak much, but he always made his bed. With military precision, hospital corners so tight you could bounce a coin. He folded his socks, lined up his shoes, and ironed his shirt every Sunday, even though no one came to see him. For most, he was just another quiet resident nearing the end of his days. But Franklin Hughes wasn't just an old man in a care home. Decades ago, he stood guard outside royal gates, bearing the weight of the crown on his shoulders and the discipline of the regiment in his bones. He had served during the height of the Cold War, posted in Germany, Cyprus, and at one point, though never confirmed, attached to a diplomatic escort in the Middle East. His records were clean, but incomplete. A few commendations, one disciplinary note, never explained, and a final honorable discharge at age 30. From that point on, the paper trail faded. No pension claims, no next of kin. Just silence, until one rainy Tuesday morning, when Franklin passed away in his sleep. No relatives to call, no arrangements in place. The home contacted the Ministry of Defense, who verified his service and offered to cover the basics. A plain casket, a standard burial in a military cemetery, no formal honors. He would be laid to rest, efficiently, quietly, and alone. But fate had a different plan. Miles Carter, a 24-year-old Queen's Guard stationed at Buckingham Palace, was reviewing the week's internal bulletin when he saw a short notice. Retired. Guardsman Franklin Hughes, Coldstream Regiment, passed away. No family reported, no formal service planned. That line stopped him cold. Miles had never met Franklin, but something about it stirred him. Maybe it was the name of the regiment, the same as his own. Or maybe it was the idea that a man could stand guard for a nation, only to be buried without a witness. He walked into his commanding officer's office and said simply, "Sir, I'd like to go." No headlines were made, no medals were earned, but a quiet detail was set in motion. Miles was granted permission to serve as an honorary escort. It wouldn't be a full ceremonial event, just one man in uniform accompanying another man, now silent, who had once worn the same. The sky over northern England was a dull gray, the kind that seems to press down on everything it touches. Miles Carter sat in the back of a military transport van, his dress uniform crisp, buttons polished to a shine. Across from him, resting silently in a flag-draped casket, was the body of Franklin Hughes. The road to the cemetery stretched over 180 miles, winding through rain-slick countryside and small towns that barely stirred. No motorcade, no bugle. Just the hum of the engine and the weight of a duty few would ever see. Miles stared ahead, motionless. Not out of protocol, but respect. He wasn't just escorting a casket, he was walking history home. When they arrived, the cemetery was empty. No chairs, no speakers. Just three people. A kind-faced priest, the care home's head nurse who took a train during her lunch break, and Miles. He stepped out first, his boots crunching softly against the damp gravel. He moved like he had 1,000 times before during drills. Upright, controlled, precise. But this wasn't ceremony. This was real, and no one was watching. Or so he thought. The gravediggers offered a nod. The casket was lowered. The priest said a few quiet words, mostly drawn from a printed template. It was over in 7 minutes, but Miles didn't move. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small wreath. White flowers, simple but dignified. He had bought it himself the night before, from a florist 2 blocks from the barracks. It cost him $20, more than he could really spare, but it didn't matter. He bent down slowly and placed it gently over the soil. The ribbon read, "Once a guard, always a guard." Then he stood, straight, still, silent. 5 full minutes. Passed. No sounds, no shift. Just wind brushing past and the steady presence of a soldier who refused to let a comrade go alone. It should have ended there. But the nurse, moved beyond words, took out her phone and snapped a single photo. A lone guardsman, standing tall beside a modest grave with nothing around him but gray sky and quiet ground. She posted it to a small veterans group on Facebook later that night. No hashtags, no caption, just, he stood alone, but it meant everything. And then, something happened. The post spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, American and British veteran communities had picked it up. Within 48, military forums, Reddit threads, even TikTok accounts were sharing the image. Some called him a hero. Others just said thank you. But they all agreed on one thing. This is what honor looks like when no one's watching. Back in London, Miles didn't know any of this yet. He'd already gone back to duty, standing guard at the gates, stoic as ever tourist snapping selfies feet away. But now people looked at him differently. Not because they recognized his face, but because they recognized the uniform and what it stood for. He didn't speak about what he did. He didn't post it. He never mentioned it in the barracks. But in a drawer beside his bunk, he kept the florist's receipt, folded once then twice, like a quiet reminder that sometimes the loudest salute is the one no one hears. 3 days after the photo of Miles standing alone at Franklin Hughes's grave hit the internet, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at the Royal Guard barracks. Not by official courier, not stamped with royal insignia, but handwritten, tucked inside a plain white envelope. No return address. Just one name in block letters on the front. Private Miles Carter. Miles found it in his locker after a 12-hour shift under a cold drizzle. At first he thought it was some formal reprimand, maybe for accepting press attention, even though he never spoke to the media. He opened it slowly, the paper still, slightly damp from his gloves, but it wasn't from the Crown. It was from across the ocean. Dear Private Carter, my name is Henry Lawson. I'm an 86-year-old U.S. Army veteran living in Ohio. I served in Korea and met a young British guard in 1953 during joint operations. His name was Franklin Hughes. Miles sat down. The letter went on. He wasn't like the other Brits. He smoked too much, cussed like an American, and always told me I was tying my boots wrong. But he could outmarch any of us, and he once carried a wounded Korean child 2 miles on foot through sniper territory just to get her medical help. We lost touch in '54. I always wondered what happened to him. Then I saw your photo, and I knew. Miles kept reading. Your silence at his grave said more than 1,000 eulogies. It told me someone still remembers. That maybe he didn't die forgotten. That maybe, just maybe, we old soldiers aren't truly alone out here. Thank you, son. You stood for all of us. Henry Miles folded the letter slowly. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, but from the weight of it all. He looked up at the barracks wall, at the black and white portraits of fallen guardsmen, and thought of Frank, the young soldier in the photo he'd never met, and now would never forget. Later that night, Miles brought the letter to his commanding officer. Not to report it, just to share it. What followed surprised everyone. By the end of the week, the Royal Guard issued a rare public statement, not about policy, not about politics, but about legacy. They released a short message. We remember every guardsman, especially the ones who believed they were forgotten. And with that, they announced something new. a memorial program for unclaimed veterans, a rotating honor system where serving guardsmen could volunteer to represent those who died alone. They called it the final detail, and it started with one man who refused to let another go without a salute. Back in Ohio, Henry Lawson received a phone call he never expected. A woman from the British Embassy asked if he'd like to attend a new memorial ceremony in London. In honor of Franklin Hughes, Henry, in his 80s, didn't hesitate. "Tell that young man I'll bring my old boots," the ones Frank made fun of. He hadn't worn the boots in over 20 years, but when Henry Lawson stepped off the plane at Heathrow, they were laced tight, the same dusty brown military issue he wore in Korea. His knees ached. His back protested every step, but his heart, that beat steady as ever. 2 guardsmen in full uniform met him at the terminal. No press, no ceremony, just a firm salute and a quiet, "Welcome to London, sir." Henry tipped his cap and said, "I'm here for a friend." The car ride from the airport was long, winding through old London streets lined with brick and memory. He didn't say much, just watched. The last time he'd been here, Winston Churchill was still alive. They passed Buckingham Palace, the gates, the guards, the tourists with their cameras. Henry blinked hard. Those red uniforms had once seemed so different to him. Now he saw something deeper. Not costumes, not tradition, but brothers. And one of them had been Frank. When they arrived at the cemetery, a small crowd had already gathered, no more than 15 people, but each with a connection. 2 nurses from Frank's care home, a local historian who found his name on an old Coldstream Guards ledger. Miles Carter stood front and center, his posture perfect, his eyes steady. Henry stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. Miles turned, saluted first. Henry returned it, slower but no less proud. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. A polished plaque had been placed at the foot of Franklin Hughes's grave. It read, "Served with honor, buried with dignity, remembered with brotherhood." A Union Jack and an American flag fluttered side by side in the cold spring breeze. Henry approached the grave and pulled a folded letter from his coat. Weathered, yellowed, the corners nearly torn. He didn't read it aloud. He just placed it gently on the soil and whispered, "Took me 70 years, you stubborn Brit. But I showed up." The crowd chuckled softly, and a tear ran down Miles's cheek before he could catch it. Then something unexpected happened. Henry turned to Miles and said, "Walk with me." Miles hesitated. He was still technically on ceremonial duty, but the commanding officer gave a silent nod. Together, the old soldier and the young guardsman took 10 slow steps away from the grave, then turned and faced it. Miles raised his hand in a formal salute. Henry, slower but steady, did the same. And for a full minute, 2 men, separated by decades, war, and nationality, stood as one. When the ceremony ended, Henry pulled Miles aside. "That day you stood for him, it reached further than you know. Veterans in the States, they felt seen again. We all did." Miles didn't say much. He just nodded. "You remind me of Frank," Henry added. Quiet, disciplined, but with that same stubborn spark, that same refusal to let someone disappear. Miles smiled. "I guess we both learned from the right men." Later that night, a photo of Henry and Miles standing at the grave made its way online. The caption was simple: "From Ohio to London, no soldier is ever truly alone." It wasn't trending, it wasn't viral, but it didn't need to be. It had already done what it needed to do. It reminded people, across borders and generations, that honor travels, that friendship doesn't end with a war, and that the greatest salute is showing up. It had been 6 weeks since the day Henry Lawson stood at the grave of his old friend, Franklin Hughes. Back at Buckingham Palace, everything looked the same. Tourists still gathered near the gates. Phones still clicked. Guards still stood in silent precision. But for Miles Carter, something had shifted. He still woke up at 4:30 every morning, still polished every button until it reflected the ceiling, still stood perfectly still for hours, rain or shine. But now there was a new sense of weight behind it. Not burden, meaning because he had seen what legacy looked like. Not in a textbook, not in a museum, but in the trembling salute of an 86-year-old man who'd flown across an ocean to honor a brother. That week, Miles requested something unusual. To meet with the commander of his unit. Not for a complaint, not for a transfer, but for a proposal. "Sir," he said, "I think we can do more." He laid out a simple plan. A volunteer-based honor guard rotation for unclaimed veterans. Men and women who died without family, but who wore the same uniform. No media, no spectacle. Just guardsmen showing up, quietly, consistently. The commander listened, arms folded, then leaned back in his chair. "You think anyone will sign up?" Miles nodded. "They already have." Within 2 weeks, the final detail program was born. Every month, a small team of Queen's Guards would be assigned to accompany veterans with no next of kin, not just to cemeteries, but sometimes to hospitals, crematoriums or memorial sites, anywhere they were needed, no fanfare, just presence. Word spread fast. Soon other regiments joined, then a few from Scotland, then across the Commonwealth. Even the American embassy requested to observe, and offered to share the idea with the U.S. military. A ripple, born from one act of stillness. Back in Ohio, Henry Lawson received a second letter. It was handwritten, just like his, but this time from Miles. Inside were 2 things: a patch from Miles's own uniform, with the Coldstream Guard's insignia stitched in, silver thread, and a small folded card with 5 words: "You stood, so I could." Henry placed it on his mantel beside an old, cracked photo. A picture of 2 young soldiers, one British, one American, laughing over tin cups in Korea. He didn't need anything else. One chilly morning in London, Miles stood guard again. Same uniform, same gait, same silence. But this time, tucked inside the lining of his coat, right over his heart, was a copy of that photo. Frank, Henry, a friendship across. To me, a family not by blood and but by code. A tourist walked past and muttered to her partner, "They're just statues in uniforms." Miles heard it, but he didn't blink, because he knew better. He wasn't standing still for the cameras, or the tourists, or even the crown. He was standing for something that mattered far more. Somewhere in a small village, a young boy watched. A video of Miles at the grave. His grandfather pointed and said, "That's what a soldier is." The boy didn't ask questions. He just watched. And so the story didn't end with a salute. It lived on, in quiet footsteps, folded flags, handwritten letters, and the steady beat of boots across cold stone. Because in the end, honor doesn't make noise. It simply shows. It had been 3 months since Henry Lawson returned to Ohio. Miles never heard from him again. No letters, no updates. But that was okay. Some things didn't need follow-up. Some connections weren't meant for daily check-ins. They were forged in something deeper. But what Henry left behind kept echoing. Back at the barracks, life returned to routine. Morning inspections, guard rotations, polishing boots until the leather shone like glass. Miles stood at the gates of Buckingham Palace like he always had. Stoic, motionless. Unreadable to the crowds who passed, laughed, took pictures. But something in him had changed. Because now, when he looked out into the sea of tourists, he didn't just see cameras. He saw the possibility of memory, of legacy, of one stranger's life being quietly preserved by another. And then one day, a letter arrived. But this time, it wasn't for him. It was addressed to the Royal Guard itself. Inside was a folded American flag, a short note and a photograph. An old one, black and white, faded at the edges. It showed 2 young men in uniform, arms over each other's shoulders. One was Franklin Hughes, the other was Henry Lawson. The note was typed. "My father passed away peacefully last week. Before he died, he asked me to send this to the young soldier in London who stood for his friend. I don't know your name, but he did. He called you Miles the Ironback. He told me you brought him peace. And for a man who had seen too much war, that meant everything." Miles read the letter 3 times. Then he put the photo on. His locker door. He never mentioned it to anyone. But that night, when the guard schedule rotated, he stayed behind in the empty hallway and walked the length of the corridor in full dress uniform. Slow, measured steps. No audience, no command. Just him and the echo of boots on polished stone. It was his way of saying goodbye. The next morning, Miles met with his commanding officer. He asked for permission to propose something new. Not official, not public-facing, but meaningful. Small, voluntary tradition. Once a month, a royal guard would be assigned to visit a grave, any grave, of a former guardsman who passed without family or ceremony. No media, no photos. Just one soldier, one wreath, and one silent salute. They called it the Quiet Watch. It began without fanfare. The first soldier chosen didn't know what to expect. He visited a grave in the countryside, left a single red rose, and stood in silence for 7 minutes. That was it. But when he returned, he left something else. A handwritten message in the logbook. I never knew the man, but somehow I still felt like I did. We wore the same badge. That's enough. Word quietly spread. Guardsmen began volunteering. Not for recognition, but because it felt right. The movement grew. Graves were visited. Names remembered. Histories rediscovered. And Miles? He watched it all unfold without saying a word. Until one day, an American tourist approached him during a break in duty. She looked at him closely, her eyes tearing up. She said, "My dad showed me a photo of you. Said you reminded him what honor looks like." Miles didn't respond. He couldn't. But after she left, he turned, I just slightly, and gave the faintest nod. Because sometimes the loudest stories are told without saying a thing. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you. Have you or someone you love ever served in the military? Do you believe enough is being done to honor those who pass without family by their side? Leave us a comment and let us know. Not just what you think of the story, but how it made you feel. Maybe you've seen a soldier standing silently in your city. Or perhaps you've attended a funeral where just one person showed up, but still gave it their all. These quiet moments often go unnoticed, but they are powerful, and they matter. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what part of the story hit you the hardest. And if you've ever known someone like Franklin or Miles, someone who stood tall even when no one was looking, share that with us. Too, your voice matters. Your memory keeps these stories alive. So don't just watch, be part of the story. Scroll down, leave a comment, and let's keep honoring those who stood, who served, and who were never truly alone.